second reading of Plato's Meno. And this is bedtime stories for people in Japan. Oh, that's bright. Okay, I got my light over here. There we go. Okay, I'm live on the air, but I'm putting this up on YouTube for the people that don't listen to my radio show. If you don't listen to my radio show, wonder why you don't, because it's the greatest radio show on the planet or anywhere else in the matrix field. So go to www.blogtalkradio/Major Tim to ground control. I'm now almost 12 o'clock midnight in Japan, and I'm going to go to bed real soon, but I'm just going to do a little bedtime story for myself. For the people in America, it's morning time, and they're just waking up, so it's a wake-up story. Here we go. The dialogue we were working on between Socrates and this punk-ass guy called Meno who thinks he knows everything. Okay, so we left off with Socrates saying, the same as in everything else. For example, if you please, take roundness. This, I would say, is a figure, not simply thus figure. I would say so because there are other figures. So he's trying to say, the first question was asked was whether virtue can be taught or it's something you naturally are born with. And Socrates is going to say in this dialogue, after he teaches this punk-ass guy what virtue is that it's inherent in everyone, and all you have to do is remember who you truly are from all the past lifetimes, that you knew everything, because you have lived billions of lifetimes and you've been everywhere in the multiverse. He's going to say it not like that, but that's the way I would say it. But that's coming up maybe in a future one, because we're not going to get there tonight, but we're just going to do a little bit tonight for you people in the morning, a little bit in the morning. Okay, so Meno says, what you said was quite right. Since I agree that there are other virtues besides justice, so there's many types of virtues, justice isn't the only virtue. What are they? Tell me, just as I would tell you other figures if you ask. Then you tell me some other virtues. Meno says, very well, courage, I think, is a virtue, and temperance, and wisdom, and high-mindedness, and plenty more. High-mindedness, okay, that's a virtue according to Meno. I don't know exactly what he means by high-mindedness, but we'll find out here. So Socrates says, here we are again, Meno. We looked for one virtue and found many. Although that was in another way, but the one that is in all those things we cannot find. So he's trying to know what virtue is, and Meno keeps giving him all these virtues. Those are virtues, but those aren't virtue. Virtue is the category that sums up all of them. So what is in all those virtues that are virtuous? And then we'll know what virtue is. Okay? So he says, Meno says, I can't see my way yet, Socrates, to find the one virtue you seek in them all, as we did with the other things. Socrates says, that is quite likely, but I will do my best to bring us a step forward, if I can. You understand, no doubt, that it is the same with everything. If someone should ask you what I mentioned just now, what is figure, Meno? And you said to him roundness, and if he asked you, as I would, is roundness figure or a figure, I suppose you would say a figure. Meno says, yes, to be sure. Socrates says, because there are other figures, isn't that the reason? And Meno says, yes. Socrates says, and if he asked further what other figures, you would tell him. And Meno says, so I would. Socrates says, and again, if he asked you in the same way what color is, and you said white, the man would ask next, is white color or a color? And you would say a color because there are others. Meno said, yes, I should. And Socrates says, and if he requested you to tell him other colors, you would tell him others that are no less colors than white. And Meno says, yes. And Socrates says, if then he followed up the argument like me and said, Quote, "We always arrive at a multitude, and I don't want that. But since you call these many by one name, and say they are all figures without exception, and that too even if they are opposite to each other, what is that which contains the round no less than the straight? You name it indeed figure, and say the round is no less figure than the straight. Is not that what you say?" Menon says, "It is." Socrates says, "Well, then you say that. Do you then mean that the round is no more round than the straight, or the straight no straighter than the round?" Menon says, "Not at all, Socrates." And Socrates says, "Yes, you do say that the round is no more figure than the straight, or the straight than the round." Menon says, "Quite true." Socrates says, "Then what is this name figure? Try to tell me. If someone asked you like that about color or figure, and you said, 'My good man, I don't understand what you want, and you don't know what you mean, and I don't know what you mean,' perhaps he would have been surprised and would have said, 'Don't you understand that I am looking for the common element in these?' Or would you have nothing to say if someone should ask, 'What is there in the round and straight and so forth, all that you call figures, the same in all?' Try to say that you may have a little practice for your reply about virtue." So Menon says, whoops, these pages are sticking together. This book is so old. Okay, Menon says, "No, no, Socrates, you say." Socrates says, "Shall I grant you that favor?" Menon says, "Please do." Socrates says, "And then will you do me the favor of telling me about virtue?" And Menon says, "Yes, yes, I will." Socrates says, "Then I must do my best. It is worth a while." Menon says, "That it is." Socrates says, "Come along then. Let me try to tell you what figure is, just think a moment. Will you accept this for it? Let us suppose that figure is the only thing in the world which is always found along with color. Good enough, eh? Or do you want something else? If you give me an answer like that about virtue, I shall be quite content, I assure you." Menon says, "But that's silly, my dear Socrates." Socrates says, "How do you mean?" Menon says, "That figure, according to your statement, is what always goes with color. Very well. But if someone said he didn't know what color is, and if he were in the same difficulty about figure, what do you think you should have answered them?" Socrates says, "Only the truth. And if my questioner were one of these clever fellows who just chop logic and argue to win, I would answer him, 'I have said my say. If I am wrong, it is your business to take up the argument and to refute it. But if we were friends like you and me now, who wish to have a talk together, you see I must answer more gently and more like friends talking together, and perhaps it is more like friends talking together, not only to answer with truth, but to use only what the one who is questioned admits that he knows. Then, that is how I will try to talk to you. Tell me, if you please, do you speak of an end or of anything?" Let me take a drink, sorry. So he says, "Do you speak of an end to anything?" "I mean something like this, a boundary or a verge. These are all the same thing. Perhaps Prodicios, which is another person, might not agree with us, but you at any rate say that a thing is bounded and ended. That's the sort of thing I mean, nothing elaborate. And Menon says, "Oh yes, I use those words, and I think I understand you." Socrates says, "Very well. You speak of a surface, or a solid, as it may be, like those things in geometry." Menon says, "Yes, I use those words." Socrates says, "There's enough then already for me to explain what I call figure. With every figure I say that to which the solid extends is the figure. To put it shortly, I would say that figure is the boundary of a solid." Menon says, "And what of color, Socrates?" Socrates says, "You're a bully, Menon. You worry an old man to answer questions, and you won't trouble to remember what Gorgias said virtue is?" Menon says, "Oh, I'll tell you that as soon as you tell me this, my dear Socrates." Socrates says, "Anyone could tell you're a handsome man and have lovers by only hearing you talk, even if he were blindfolded." Menon says, "Why, pray?" Socrates says, "Because in your talk you do nothing but lay commands on people, like young society beauties who are regular tyrants as long as they are young and good looking. And perhaps you have found me out already. I can't resist the handsome, so I will do you the favor of answering." This is back in a time when homosexuality was much more open than it is nowadays, obviously. But he's willing to be homosexual like, not because he is a homosexual, but because he doesn't have homophobia, which most people have. Even I have, because I'm a straight person and I want to prove my straightness by not be acting like a homosexual. Anyway, we'll get into that on another day. Okay, so he says, "Yes, do me the favor." Socrates says, "Then, do you wish me to answer in the style of Gregorius so that you could most easily follow?" And Menon says, "Of course I do." So Socrates imitates Gregorius how he says it. He says, "Well, you people say that emanations or films are given off from things. That is the science of Empedocles," which is another philosopher. Menon says, "Certainly." Socrates says, "And there are pores or passages, and the emanations go pouring into them and through them." Menon says, "Quite so." And Socrates says, "And some of the films fit some of the pores, but some are too small or too large." Menon says, "That is true." Socrates says, "You speak of sight also." Menon says, "Yes." Socrates says, "Then from these things comprehend what I tell thee, as Pindar said." Pindar is Pindar. "Color is an emanation from figures, and is symmetrical with sight and perceptible by sense." Menon says, "Ha ha ha! That is an excellent answer of yours, my dear Socrates." Socrates says, "Perhaps because you are used to the way it is put, and at the same time, I think you notice that you could define in this way what sound is, and smell, and many other such things." And Menon says, "Certainly, yes." And Socrates says, "Because the answer is in high poetic style, so you like it better than the one about figure." Menon says, "I do, certainly." Socrates says, "But it is not so good, my dear son of Alexdemos," which is his father maybe. "I am convinced the other is better, and I think you would agree with me if you were not obliged to go off before the mysteries, as you said yesterday. You have only to stay and be initiated." So they're all in mystery schools. The mysteries are the secret cabals that later become all the other secret societies, which later become the many other ones. I can't even think of all their names because it's now past 12 o'clock midnight, so we won't get into it. I think I'm going to go on more about this later, but let's just go a little bit further so you know where I'm going to lay off, and I'm going to tell you the basic summation of what I just read really quickly before I go to bed. Oh, Oh, I would stay, my dear Socrates, if you would only go on talking like this. So he said, I would not go along with the cabal and go into the secret society and go into my initiations with the cults if you would just keep talking like this, because you're now being so poetic, and they all do that in the little secret societies that I belong to. So he says, indeed, my will shall not be wanting. I would go on talking like this for both our sakes, but I fear I shall not be able to go on talking like this for long. But now please try yourself to keep your promise to give me a general description of virtue. What is it? No more turning the singular into the plural, as witty people say whenever you smash something. Just leave virtue sound and whole, and tell me what it is. I have shown you how to do it by my examples. Menon says, then, my dear Socrates, virtue seems to me to be, as the poets say, quote, to rejoice in what is handsome, and to be able. I agree with the poets, and I say virtue is to desire handsome things and to be able to provide them. So Socrates says, do you say that the man who desires handsome things is desirous of good things? Menon says, by all means. Socrates says, do you imply that there are some that desire bad things and others good? Don't you think, my dear fellow, that all desire good things? Menon says, no, I don't. Socrates says, but some desire bad things, right? And Menon says, yes. So Socrates says, thinking the bad thing to be good, you mean, or even recognizing that they are bad, still they desire them. Menon says, both, I think. Socrates says, do you really think, my dear Menon, that anyone, knowing the bad things to be bad, still desires them? Menon says, certainly. And Socrates says, what does he desire, do you say? To have them. Menon says, to have them, what else? Socrates says, thinking that the bad things benefit him that has them, or knowing that they injure whomever get them. Menon says, some thinking that the bad things benefit, some also knowing that they injure. Socrates says, do those who think that the bad things benefit know that the bad things are bad? Menon says, I don't think that at all. I don't think that at all. Socrates says, then it is plain that those who desire bad things are those who don't know what they are, but they desire what they thought were good, whereas they really are bad. So those who do not know what they are, but think they are good, clearly desire the good. Is not that so? Menon says, it really seems like it. Socrates says, very well. Those who desire the bad things, as you say, but yet think that bad things injure whomever get them, know, I suppose, that they themselves will be injured by them. Menon said, they must. Socrates says, but do not these believe that those who are injured are miserable in so far as they are injured? Menon says, they must believe that too. Socrates says, miserable means wretched. Menon says, so, I think. Socrates says, well, is there anyone who wishes to be miserable and wretched? And Menon says, I think not, Socrates. So then he goes on, then nobody desires bad things, my dear Menon, nobody, unless he wishes to be like that. For what is the depth of misery other than to desire bad things and to get them? Menon says, it really seems that is the truth, Socrates, and no one desires what is bad. Socrates says, you said just now, didn't you, that virtue is to desire good things and to be able to provide them? Menon says, yes, I did. Socrates says, well, one part of what you said, the desiring, is in all, and in this respect one man is no better than another. Menon says, it seems so. Socrates says, it is clear then that if one is better than another, he must be better in the ability. Socrates says, certainly. Socrates says, then, according to your argument, virtue is the power to get good things. Menon says, my dear Socrates, the whole thing, I must admit, seems to be exactly as you take it. And then Socrates goes on, now let us see whether your last is true. Perhaps you might be right. You say virtue is to be able to provide the good. Menon says, quite so. Socrates says, don't you call good such things as health and wealth? Let me take a drink. We're going to end in a moment. I'm just going to sum up this when I get to the point where it needs to be summed up. Okay. Don't you call good such things as health and wealth? Menon says, yes. And to possess gold and silver and public honor and appointments. Socrates says, don't you say some other things are good besides these? Menon says, no, at least I mean all such things as those. Socrates says, very well, to provide gold and silver is virtue. According to Menon, the family friend of the great king, do you add to your providing, my dear Menon, the qualification fairly and justly, or does that make no difference to you? And if a man provides them unjustly, do you call it virtue all the same? Menon says, oh, dear me, no, Socrates. Socrates says, it is vice then. Menon says, dear me, yes, of course. Socrates says, it is necessary then, as it seems, to add to this getting justice or temperance or piety or some other bit of virtue, or else it will not be virtue, although it provides good things. Menon says, why? How could it be virtue without these? Socrates says, and not to get gold and silver when that is not just, neither for yourself nor anyone, is not this not getting also virtue? Menon says, it looks like it. So you can't do anything unjustly and call it virtuous. Whether you're getting good or whether you think you're getting good or not, if it's done unjustly, it's not good. Okay, so Socrates says, then the getting of good things would not be virtue any more than the not getting, but as it seems, getting with justice would be virtue, and getting with such qualifications vice. Menon says, I think it must be as you put it. Socrates says, now we said a little while ago that each of them is a bit of virtue, justice and temperance, and all these things. Menon says, yes. Socrates says, then are you making fun of me, Menon? Menon says, how so, Socrates? Socrates says, because I begged you just now not to break virtue into bits, or give me virtue as a handful of small change, but I gave you specimens to show how you ought to answer. And you simply paid no attention. Now you tell me virtue is to be able to get good things with justice, and justice, you said, is a bit of virtue. Menon says, yes, that is what I said. Menon says, it follows then from what you agree that to do whatever we do along with a bit of virtue is virtue. For you say justice is a bit of virtue, and so that each of those bits. Well, why do I say this? Because when I begged you to tell me what whole virtue is, instead of telling me that, far from it, you say that every action is virtue if it be done with a bit of virtue, just as if you had explained what virtue is as a whole, and I should know it at once when if you dropped your coin up into the farthings. Okay, I missed this one. Let me see. Let me read that one sentence again because that didn't make sense to me. Okay, because when I begged you to tell me what whole virtue is, instead of telling me that, far from it, you say that every action is virtue if it be done with a bit of virtue, just as if you had explained what virtue is as a whole, and I should know it at once, even if you chopped your coin up into farthings. Okay, so he's chopping up into his logic into small bits, and he thinks it's still the whole. Okay, farthings are smaller coins. Okay, I got it now. Then I must put the very same question from the beginning. As it seems, my dear friend Menon, what is virtue? If a little bit of virtue would make any action virtue, for that is as much as saying, whenever anyone says it, that all action with virtue is virtue. Don't you think yourself that I must put the same question again? Or do you believe that we can know what a bit of virtue is when we do not know virtue itself? Menon says, I don't believe that. Socrates says, perhaps you remember that when I answered you about figure a while ago, we excluded such an answer as might try to explain things by using what was not yet agreed between us, but what we were seeking still. Menon says, we did right to exclude that. Socrates says, then don't you do it now, my dear fellow. We are still trying to find out what virtue is as a whole, and pray do not believe you will make that clear to anyone by using bits of virtue in your answer. You will never explain anything to anyone by the same manner of speaking, but you will again come up against the same question, what this virtue is which you bring into your explanation. Do you think there's something in what I say? Menon says, I think you are quite right. Socrates says, then, beginning an answer, what is virtue, according to you and your friends? Menon says, wow, my Socrates, you are just like what I always heard before I met you, puzzled yourself and puzzling everyone else. Now, you seem to me to be a regular wizard. You dose me with drugs, and bewitch with charms, and drown me in puzzledom. I tell you just you are like, if you will forgive a little jest, your look and the rest of you are exactly a fat fish, and you sting like a stingray. Only go into one of those fish and you go numb. And that is the sort of thing you seem to have done to me. Really and truly, my soul is numb, and my mouth is numb, and what answer you I do not know. Yet I have 1,000 times made long speeches about virtue before many a large audience, and good speeches too, as I was convinced, but now I have not a word to say at all as to what it is. I must say you are wise not to sail away or travel abroad, for if you did this as a foreigner in a foreign city, you would probably be run out as a wizard. Socrates says, you are a young rogue, Menon, and you almost took me in. Menon says, how, Socrates? Socrates says, I know why you made that comparison to me. Menon says, why do you think so? Socrates says, that I might make another of you. I know this, that all the famous beauties love being put into comparisons to pay them, you see, for comparisons of the beautiful are beautiful, I think, but I will not do it with you in return. Well, if this stingray is numb itself, as well as making others numb, I am like it. If not, I am not. For I am not clear-headed myself when I make others puzzled, but I am as puzzled can be, and thus I make others puzzled too. So now, what virtue is, I do not know, but you knew, perhaps, before you touched me, although now you resemble one who does not know. All the same, I wish to investigate, with your help, that we may both try to find out what it is. So that's as far as I'm going to go tonight. So what he's going to do is, Menon's going to say, well, if I don't know what it is and you don't know what it is, how are we going to find out what it is? And Socrates is going to go into the greatest discussion about remembering everything you know from past lives, and which is what I do on the every time I say, would you be willing to claim, own, and acknowledge everything you aren't willing to claim, own, and acknowledge about what you know, what you be, what you perceive, and what you receive now from other lifetimes that you were willing to perceive it. And that's what I do on the call, because every time you say yes, you're opening up to this infinite potential that Socrates is going to open up us to on this book next Wednesday. So call in, Hump Day Show, 9 p.m. New York time, which is 6 p.m. What time? 6 p.m. California time. So that's all for today, folks. I'm going to read more of Plato, because Plato is the man, the myth, the legend that I was trained by in a former incarnation that I'm able to now remember. And I'm going to do the same thing I'm doing to slow down the video that I did before. So if you guys didn't know what I did, I'm showing you now. So let's hope this slows down. Okay, we'll see when we have the replay, because I can't know it's slowing down or not, but we'll know in the replay. Okay, I'm signing off the YouTube video now. Goodbye, YouTube people.